Egyptian civilization is one of the civilizations that left a great mark on history. Pharaohs, pyramids, sphinxes, and papyrus writings are some of the many contributions of this civilization, but it is also full of mysteries. The power of the Egyptian civilization, how the pyramids were built, and many other mysteries are still unexplained. Although there are many studies on this subject today, it is still largely unsolved. Our subject today is Narmer, the first pharaoh of this great civilization. Now, if you are ready, let's begin. Before we start, we would like to remind you that if you like and enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Have a good day. Narmer was the first king of Egypt, who peacefully unified the country at the beginning of the first dynastic period. However, he is also referred to as the last king of the pre-dynastic period before the rise of a king named Menes, who unified the country through conquest. In the early days of Egyptology, these kings were considered two different men. It was thought that Narmer tried to unify at the end of one period, and Menes succeeded him, starting the next period in Egyptian history. This theory became increasingly problematic as time went on, and while little archaeological evidence supports the existence of Menes, Narmer is well attested in the archaeological record. The great Egyptologist Flinders Petrie argued that Narmer and Menes were the first pharaoh of the first dynasty, because the two names identified one man. Narmer was his name, and Menes was an honorific. The same understanding applies to the other pharaoh associated with Menes, Hor-Aha, the second king of the first dynasty, who is said to have unified Egypt under centralized rule. If Hor-Aha was the ruler who brought about the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, then Menes was simply his honorific, meaning he who endured. Some scholars argue that there is no reason to debate which of these kings could have unified Egypt, because the country was not fully unified until the reign of Khsekhemwy, the last king of the second dynasty and father of King Djoser, who ushered in the third dynasty. However, this claim has been repeatedly questioned, as there is clear evidence that King Den wore the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, signaling unification under his reign. More importantly, the Narmer Palette clearly shows that Narmer wore the war crown of Upper Egypt and the red mat crown of Lower Egypt, so it is generally accepted that unification first took place under the reign of King Narmer. The Palette of Narmer is a zigzag shield-shaped engraving, just over 64 centimeters long, depicting Narmer conquering his enemies and uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. It has some of the oldest aeroglyphs found to date. The palette is carved from a single piece of siltstone, commonly used for ceremonial tablets during Egypt's first dynasty, and tells the story of Narmer's conquest. On one side, Narmer is depicted wearing the war crown of Upper Egypt and the red wicker crown of Lower Egypt, indicating that it fell to him during the conquest. Below this scene is the largest engraving on the palette of two men wrapping the serpentine necks of unknown monsters. These creatures have been interpreted as representing Upper and Lower Egypt, but there is nothing in this section to justify this interpretation. No one has ever definitively interpreted what this section means. Under this side of the palette, the king is depicted as a bull piercing the walls of a city with its horns and trampling its enemies under its hooves. The other side of the palette is a single, unified image of Narmer with his war club, about to strike an enemy by the hair. At his feet are two other men, either dead or fleeing his wrath. A bald servant is depicted standing behind the king, holding his sandals, while in front of him and above his victim, the god Horus is depicted watching his victory and blessing him by bringing him more enemy captives. The Palette of Narmer was discovered in 1897 to 1898 AD by the British archaeologists Quibell and Green in the Temple of Horus at Nekhen, one of the first capitals of the First Dynasty of Egypt. As mentioned above, it was considered a description of an actual historical event until fairly recently, when it was recognized as a symbolic inscription. There are many different theories about the palette, and each one seems quite plausible until one hears the next. So to this day, there is no consensus on what the inscription means or whether it relates to historical events. However, based on the age of the inscription and the paintings, it is assumed that a great king named Narmer had something to do with the unification of Egypt and would later begin his reign. Upper Egypt was more urbanized, with cities such as Thinis, Hierakonpolis, and Nakhta developing quite rapidly, while Lower Egypt was more rural, with rich agricultural areas stretching from the Nile River. Both regions developed steadily for thousands of years during Egypt's pre-dynastic period, until trade with other cultures and civilizations led to the increasing development of Upper Egypt, which conquered its neighbor for grains or other agricultural products to feed the growing population or to trade with it. After Narmer established himself as the supreme king, he married the Nakhta princess Neithotep in an alliance to strengthen ties between the two cities. Neithotep's tomb, discovered in the 19th century AD, was detailed enough to suggest that the king was more than his wife, and some scholars speculate that Narmer may have ruled after his death. His name, inscribed on seracs from that period, supports this claim, as do other inscriptions, but it is still not universally accepted. Egyptian cities never reached the size of those in Mesopotamia, perhaps because Egyptians recognized the threats posed by such development. While Mesopotamian cities were largely abandoned due to overuse of land and pollution of water sources, Egyptian cities like Sais have existed for thousands of years. Although later advances in urban development ensured the continuation of cities, the early efforts of kings like Narmer could have provided the model. We have told you about Narmer, who laid the foundations of Egyptian civilization firmly and ensured the survival of this civilization for years with his moves. What do you think? Do you think Narmer can be considered one of the founders of a great civilization? We care about your opinion. Please share it with us.